A lot of questions being raised on both fronts here, but we're not exactly hearing reporting on much of both incidents. What to make of that with New York City Councilman Joe Borelli, Democratic strategist Jessica Tarloff, and the host of Sincerely Kat on Fox Nation, Kat Timpf. So, Joe, I guess the concern that a lot of Republicans have had is that what's good for the goose doesn't necessarily apply, well, to the gander, whatever, whatever that means. But there is a valid point here about it's questionable for the President of the United States to urge a leader of another country to look in to a guy who wants to be the leader of this country. I get that, and the concern to get to the bottom of that. But no concern about what a guy who wants to be a leader of this country was doing when he was the second highest elected official in this country. In Ukraine.
And that's why I don't understand the media's coverage of this. Joe Biden was actually the vice president. If you listen to his own words, which you just had on the screen, he admits essentially to a quid pro quo involving U.S. taxpayer dollars, $1 billion of it, in response to the Ukrainians firing a prosecutor that fire prosecutor that was investigating a company which his son had a financial interest.
Well, just to be clear, this prosecutor at the time was looking at a lot of things, and there was concern about government corruption. This made it seem, or the Trump folks are trying to say, this made it seem like a quid pro quo deal to ease the pressure on his son, who was a board member of one of these gas companies being...
Again, you listen to the vice president's
But you're right,
words.
that was left out.
I think the Democrats are really risking one of those Wile E. Coyote moments where they think they have the president and more information about Joe Biden's involvement actually comes out. Maybe even more information about the Politico scandal that they reported back in 2017 about the Ukrainians potentially helping Clinton during the 2016 election. So there's a lot of landmines for the Democrats to fall on.
Well, I'm trying hard not to play the politics game with this, Jessica. I'm just saying there are a fair number of questions being raised in both cases, and both should be examined. What I do notice in the coverage is that it's not.
Well, that's because the Joe Biden story has actually already been covered. So this started with a New York Times piece, and Ken Vogel is still riding high on his reporting, which has been thoroughly debunked by other outlets, including the Washington Post and most notably Bloomberg. They were the first ones. The timeline here is extremely important. So Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. That's the name of the natural gas company.
Ukrainian natural gas company.
Ukrainian natural gas company.
And he was on the board. Why? Did he have any energy experience or anything like that?
No, him and I believe, was it John Kerry's son, have a consulting company or a hedge fund. And that's
but no background in energy. And his father is the vice president of the United States. Go ahead.
I'm here to put out the timeline of this.
Sure.
Shokin, who was the prosecutor, the corrupt one, if you talk to any anti-corruption activist in the country, they will say that Shokin was a tremendous problem, and that's what Joe Biden was talking about when he said they needed to be fired.
And he wasn't talking about the fact that Shokin at the time was investigating, among other things. Time, though, he was investigating all energy contracts with the country.
The investigation into Burisma, the company that Hunter Biden was on the board of, closed in 2015. Joe Biden arrived in Ukraine to put that threat in there in 2016.
I believe he was looking at 11 company contracts,
but
present
this is
or
the
past
only one.
at the time.
That is not the reporting.
I'm not here to exonerate or blame anyone, Jessica. I'm just saying you were doing a timeline to vindicate a vice president at the time and draw no connection or curiosity between one event and another.
But I don't. If the investigation,
people are already taking the leap with President Trump that he is.
But if the president is alleging, which he absolutely is, and Rudy Giuliani and whatever kind of language he was using with Chris Cuomo the other evening, that President Biden was doing this to bail out his son, it does matter that the prosecutor, Shokin, was not looking into the company that Hunter Biden was on the board of. This isn't just about natural gas companies. This is alleging that Joe Biden did this to bail out his son.
I just think that in general, the way that this is all being reported on is wrong, and it's not the way that I look at things. I'm concerned about all of this, no matter what side you're on. I think that people should be better at looking at instances as Americans rather than as members of a political party.
Well, I have taken the time to look into both controversies and the timeline. And I'm more up on these energy contracts than you might think. And I think there's fair fodder there to look into the timing. Now, you could say that the investigation of Burisma was done, but the follow-up investigation involved almost a dozen other Ukrainian energy concerns, one of which had, Joe Biden's son on the board. Now, I'm not saying there's a quid pro quo or that he would do anything nefarious, just as I'm not going to leap to conclusions on these allegations about the president. What I will ask you, Kat, this issue involving the president raises serious concerns that he was using, once again, a foreign power to potentially influence another election. And I'm looking at only that for the time being to say that right now in this environment, that doesn't look good for the president.
Absolutely not. I completely agree with that. I want to know more about this situation. But the reason I want to know more about it is because I want to know more about all the situations. I don't trust anyone in the government, regardless of political party.
Well, I trust Joe.
Well, I was going to say
Borrelli, not Biden.
except for Bill de Blasio. It was a real shame to see him out. I thought he was going to take it all the way.
More time to take care of New York.
Yeah, well, sure. Or, mess things up. But because I think that the more transparency we have and the more we know about all issues, regardless of party, the better decisions we can make as voters. So it's not a good look. Do I think it's going to take him down? No. I also think that the Democrats' motivations for wanting to know more about this are not the same as mine. I think that their motivations are that they do want to take Trump out.
Well, I think this is where the politics comes in, and trying hard not to do that. And I credit Jessica with trying to be very careful about one thing or the other. But, Joe, the one thing I will raise is that if you are the White House and you've just survived this Mueller report, or you hope you have, and they're doing this kind of stuff, maybe perfectly valid reasons, like, hey, the media is covering up this story involving Joe Biden, and you're pissed, right? I get it. You don't do this.
Look,
and if it turns out that was being done, I know Rudy Giuliani in this rambling interview on CNN argued that it's perfectly fine and legal. Well, it doesn't pass the smell test.
It was a shame to see Rudy Giuliani trashed and actually be vindicated by quoting Biden's own words. But there's also...
But to say that it was perfectly fine for the president to do this if he did, and he didn't believe the president did it, I mean, I don't know the law part of it, but the smell test is
Look, as we often have to, we have to translate some of the president's tweets. What he said this morning...
I was having trouble enough translating Giuliani on this.
Well, yeah, but this morning, he said that the Ukrainian government should investigate corruption of Joe Biden's son. I mean, this does involve a high level, the highest, really, the vice president, level of U.S. government involvement with Ukraine, a quid pro quo. And if you take just that on its face, why wouldn't the president be concerned about a corruption?
But you knew you had dirt on a guy who could be your opponent, right? And when it came to what was going on in Ukraine at the time, other Western governments were looking into Ukraine and how corrupt it was. And along came the eventual election of this guy without a day of elected experience who is now running Ukraine. The same guy this President Trump called to argue for this. So there's a lot of...
I'm not saying it might not benefit Trump. I'm saying there might be a perfectly good reason for investigating corruption in our own government.
If he made the call, would that bother you? And that call to do just that.
If the motive was to find out why Joe Biden, in his own words, was using taxpayer dollars to leverage a prosecutor's firing in Ukraine, I think that is a valid claim to ask the new president of Ukraine, who vowed to eliminate this type of corruption.
Jessica.
Okay, so there are a couple of issues that are really important here. There is millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to a Democratic ally in the region that was held up because of this. According to the Wall Street Journal reporting, you had President Trump not just ask Zelensky once, allegedly 8 times. And it was so serious what was going on, the potential crimes being extortion, conspiracy to commit extortion, and then conspiracy to violate federal election law, that a whistleblower, someone who is now risking their career, when you listen to Lindsey Graham, who says, we know who it is, we're going after them, he thought it was so serious that he had to blow the whistle on this. This is something that people don't want to do. They know that their careers end after this.
It's only an allegation at this point.
By the way, you're looking at the dollar amount here, the $250 million. At the time with Biden, it was a billion.
No. I'm talking about the aid to Ukraine that got held up.
I know what you're saying. But at the time, we were threatening $1 billion on that case. I'm not comparing $1 billion versus $250 million. I'm just saying, pursue both. Look into both.
But the Biden claim has been looked into, and that's what Biden was saying on the trail yesterday.
I love you dearly. You're wrong. It has not been thoroughly looked at. It has not been thoroughly vetted. And the investigation never got finished because obviously the guy left. So all of that stopped. A new government came in, a new guy with no experience at all, a great actor, I'm told, really good, a man of the people. And I just want to be very, very clear here. That was never resolved because the guy who was maybe a nefarious character, he's gone now. And everything that followed ended.
So the issue is not just Burisma. for you that you're saying
Right.
that is not what I'm hearing from President Trump.
Corruption is corruption. If people are trying
But
to
it's alleged that Joe Biden let his son off.
But please, if we want to investigate the president and what he meant and implied and was arm twisting over the course of several phone calls with the leader of Ukraine, aren't we at least as obligated to investigate the incident that has got him all fired up?
And I think Democrats should want to do that, because if you only investigate the one, then Trump's obviously going to spin it as more bullying. This is another witch hunt, et cetera, et cetera. And that really fires up people on the base of Trump's base. And also, people are going to start to tune it out if it's all just Trump focus this, Trump focus that. I want to
But
see
do
both
Republicans,
looked
let me
into.
ask you that, do Republicans risk being kind of hypocritical on this Inspector General front? Yes, let's hear the guy who has something to say about how the Mueller investigation started and maybe the false pretenses on which it started, but not something that could be damaging to this president about trying to arm twist influence in Ukraine.
Yes. I think both sides are doing it, which is why it's so frustrating. I wish that we could all
I want both issues to be covered.
Yeah, I agree.
have no horse in this race. I just want both issues
So do
to
I.
be covered. The president, by the way, has been commenting on this entire issue. Jenna, do we still have that? Now that the Democrats and the fake news media have gone bust on every other one of their witch hunt schemes, they are trying to start one just as ridiculous as the others. Call it the Ukraine witch hunt, while at the same time trying to protect sleepy Joe Biden. Will fail again. Well, Mr. President, there's a lot here that has to be answered for, and a lot here that has to be clarified, and a lot of information you have to allow the Inspector General in this case to get out, and this fellow who has sort of drawn attention to it to speak. So that's on you, and it will vindicate you if it's everything you say it is. Fair and balanced, both sides, after this.